Now, over the weekend, as I mentioned, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi led a small group of senior House Democrats on a secret visit to Ukraine that included a meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and other top officials in Ukraine's capital city of Kyiv. In a statement, the group said, quote, "Our delegation traveled to Kyiv to send an unmistakable and resounding message to the entire world. America stands firmly with Ukraine." With me now to talk about all of this and more is Congressman Greg Steube. He is a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, and he represents the 17th Congressional District of Florida. Congressman Steube, welcome back to the program.
Yeah. Hey, Tony. Thanks for having me.
Now, Congressman, I've been on some CODELs. I've led some CODELs, and normally these are bipartisan. In fact, this is the first time I recall seeing a congressional trip that excluded one party of Congress. Have you seen this before?
I've never seen this before. I've only been in Congress for 2 terms, but it was my understanding, because I tried to set up my own CODELs, that they had to be bipartisan, that the rules required them to be bipartisan. If you didn't have a Democrat colleague, or for Democrats, a Republican colleague that was going to participate with you, you couldn't have the CODEL, because the whole purpose of them is to have a bipartisan trip wherever you're going. I'm on the Foreign Affairs Committee. I certainly wasn't invited to this trip. I don't think that there was a number of members that were invited, and obviously they didn't have a single Republican, which is very telling that Pelosi didn't want Republicans there. I'm sure she could have found somebody on the Foreign Affairs Committee like myself to go. I'm sure there's a lot of members that are Republicans on the Foreign Affairs Committee that would have gone.
Now, again, I think it's great that she went in terms of communicating the support of Congress on this, but it does raise lots of questions as to why one or two Republicans. I mean, there's a couple of Republicans she could have picked that probably would have sang her song. But what would you suggest would be the rationale for not including Republicans in this trip?
Well, everything that Speaker Pelosi does has a political motivation in it. And so that picture that you saw, she posted on Twitter or social media, of her and those other Democratic members walking up the steps with Zelensky, obviously was a complete political motivation to show that only Democrats stand with Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. And it's very obvious that there was Republicans missing from that. So clearly that was intentional. If she wanted Republicans to be there, a Republican would have been there. I'm sure just about every member of the caucus, if they didn't have something else going on, would have loved the opportunity to go there, especially those of us that are on the Foreign Affairs Committee. They've now done 2 or 3 trips there. This is the 3rd or 4th one that I'm aware of where I, as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, haven't been invited. There's been other members of the Foreign Affairs Committee that are Republican that haven't been invited as well.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to be critical all the time, but I do think she opens herself up to criticism for not following normal protocol and inviting other members of Congress of the other party. And so I think it leaves me to believe that this is political. This is about kind of bolstering the sagging Democratic numbers in the polls because they're seen as weak on foreign policy, and they've led us down this path. You look at Afghanistan, you look at all of this, and I think they wanted all the spotlight. That's my take on it.
Of course. And again, if she wanted a Republican there would have been a Republican on the Foreign Affairs Committee that would have been there. I would have gone. I'm sure there's a number of other members that would have gone. And that's not what she wanted. Clearly, it was intentional that not a single Republican go there. And that's all on her. That's a decision that she has to make. And from my understanding of the rules, it requires you to have somebody from the other party there.
All right, Congressman Steube, I want to ask one more question. I want to move on to your bill that you're trying to get a vote on the House floor regarding. But she pushed for the additional spending for Ukraine, the $20 billion in military assistance, 8.5 to bolster Ukrainians' economy, and $3 billion in humanitarian aid. But in the conversation, she said this. She said, we're also working on the coronavirus pandemic response simultaneously, and it's yet to be seen if these two will be connected. Is this another effort to force Republicans to vote for bad domestic spending in order to show their support for Ukraine?
Oh, absolutely. That's how she plays the game. She shoves 2,800 pages worth of spending into one bill and makes you have to take a bad vote against, say, Ukraine weapons versus more COVID spending, that some of which hasn't even been spent yet. That's absolutely the way that they operate as the Democratic majority. I would not be surprised at all if that's what she ends up doing. There's been a lot of talk about COVID spending, and even in her own party, there's been some pushback amongst Democrats to do another round of COVID spending when no more mask mandates. We saw recently flying nationally, you don't have to wear a mask, all of these different things that have been pulled back. Why would you do another spending bill on COVID? So it would make sense that she would try to lop that into something that most of the members would want to vote for.
Now, Congressman Steube, next month marks the 50th anniversary of Title IX of the Education Amendments of the 1972. And this deals with education. It deals with discrimination based on sex in funding for education. You have a measure that is designed to protect women and girls in sports. Very quickly, tell us about it.
Yeah, I filed a bill that would allow and require that only biological women can compete in women's sports. And like you said in your monologue in the beginning, the thought that we actually have to do this in Congress and say to the American people and to governments and universities and otherwise that only biological women can be competing with biological women in women's sports, you would think that we are in a completely different universe. But it's unfortunate that we are there, but we are there. And I think it's important that young girls who compete collegiately or athletically shouldn't be forced to compete with biological men. Of course, Speaker Pelosi isn't going to hear my bill and work it through the process. So we filed a discharge petition on the floor of the House of Representatives. If we get 218 signatures on the discharge petition, it will force a vote on the floor of the House. And I'm hopeful to get every Republican. And once we get every Republican, start working on the Democrats.
And just in 4 days, you picked up 107 signatures, so you're well on your way. And I'm sure you would like our viewers and listeners to call their member of Congress and tell them to sign on to your discharge petition.
Yeah, absolutely. If any of your viewers can help with that, that would be great. We want to put pressure on the Democrats to have them be forced to vote on this bill that would not allow biological men to compete with young girls in sports.
Makes perfect sense to me, and we'll do just that. Greg Steube, always great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, good to see you.